Hey, hello everybody. Thank you very much for attending our session. My name is Matthias Zimmermann. I work for BSI Switzerland. I'm one of the project leads for the Eclipse Scout project. This is my colleague Daniel Will. He will present himself a while later. We're going to talk about Eclipse Scout that is going to Java and HTML5 within the Eclipse Neon release train. So on the agenda, very briefly, what's Scout about? Why is it here? What kind of problems does it solve? Then I'll do some brief wrap-up of 16 years of technology history of Scout, because that's the age of Eclipse Scout. And then we're going to show the new HTML5 UI styling and theming. And we also talk about the new Eclipse Scout platform. I will do the first part until the HTML5 UI, and my colleague will be talking about the Eclipse Scout Java platform that is also new with the Neon release. So what's Eclipse Scout about? Basically, it's building boring business applications, data entry, data out. And it has some nice features such as multi-device support. So you build your application once and it's rendered either in a desktop browser or its look and feel is adapted to tablets or mobiles. And you write it only once, so there's single source capability. And now, other part is that it's completely based on Java and HTML5. And the goals of this framework is, first, it's a long-term strategy. What do we mean with this? Is we build business applications and that our customers, these tend to live for 5, 10 or even longer time frames. This is not unusual, but it's more the standard that they live so long. So we have to take this into account when we build business applications, that the code we write has to survive for a very long time and at the same time should not become legacy. This is basically the promise of Scout. It's also boosting productivity of the developers. This is very important because we are a Swiss-based company, and if you build software in Switzerland, you better be efficient, otherwise your prices will never be competitive. Then it's easy to learn, so if you have new guys coming from university, or basically the only thing we require is that they have a good understanding of Java language. Once you have that, you can be productive with Eclipse Scout within 1 or 2 weeks on the job. So even for short-term practical people coming from university, we can turn them into productive members of the team pretty quickly. If you want to know more details or want to talk to us about some specific topics that are not covered here, you can visit us today and tomorrow at the booth number 8. There's also chocolate and coffee there, so feel free to join. This is how an example looks like in the back. Here we see the application rendered on the desktop browser, the same application on the tablet on the mobile device. This is the Eclipse IDE. Basically, it's a Java perspective that will be the main point where you do Scout applications. So, history, back to the future. Let's go back to 1999. At that time, there was a company called Google. It's still here, slightly bigger than that. Google was still in beta. Your Explorer in Windows, it looked like this, and Scout application looked like that. It was a small company, BSI, at that time, and the UI looked like, let's say, well, you had to start somewhere, no? So it was SQL Windows, minimalistic, and you could do stuff. That was good enough at that time. And the company still survived the first couple of years, and it became clear that Scout should move to some more stable platform that has a brighter future than SQL Windows. And for this, we have chosen Java and XML. So applications were configured in XML, and the whole thing was, the Java was responsible for parsing XML and rendering a runtime application on the screen that you see in the background. If we go further in time, then we had customers that over time started to ask for Eclipse RCP client to roll out to their people. That's the point where Eclipse came into the game. So we added Eclipse to the technology stack to meet the demand of customers to have Eclipse RCP applications. Then we pretty much liked Eclipse runtime platform, so we moved the whole framework on top of the Eclipse platform, not just the client in certain cases. And eventually found it would be cool to open source the Scout framework, because our business, we make the money with the product and licenses and not with the framework below. So at the end, we finally decided it would give more advantages than disadvantages to move something like Scout to the open source world. Then demand for web application grew, and after looking at Vaadin and Wicked, we found out that Eclipse Wrap was actually our best option to move the existing applications into the web. That's the point where we have added web clients to the Scout platform. This was the first time we actually started to deal with web. Later we added mobile and tablet support as well, and we were really happy with that until when we had in competitions, we found out that other providers, they did have more flashy user interfaces, and it became clear that users expected more styling and more flashy stuff, and they said, why don't you do CSS3, and it should be more modern and stuff like that. The other part we found out in the recent couple of years was starting to hurt us a bit was the integration game. Integrating our products in environments and enterprises, we found if we go to enterprise containers, if you have to WebSphere, VLS, and we have to integrate enterprise Java beans, there was always this tricky part, is the class path of the OSGi applications, which basically we can solve, but it makes us inefficient. And we offer fixed price stuff, everything that takes longer than absolutely necessary is going to kill the baseline on our side. So these two reasons basically created the change that we're talking about now. The change is that Eclipse Scout does no longer depend on the Eclipse runtime platform with the Neon release. This is on the part that Daniel will tell us afterwards. And on the UI side, we have now a full HTML5 JavaScript CSS3 framework that is rendering what we actually program. So let's have a look at this new HTML5 UI. This is an example application built on top of Eclipse Scout. So this is our product that we sell for money, the new HTML5 UI that I see, and we can see a bunch of controls and stuff like that. So basically up here, you have a perspective switcher. This is your application needs to meet demands of department 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So they have different demands. They want to see different entities. They need to have different processes. So here's the possibility to switch between these different roles that users are using their application. Once you have selected one of these roles, you can then navigate within here for entities and stuff like that. If you pick an entity, you see the content over there. And depending on where you are here, you have context-sensitive actions. You have table controls that react to what you do here. We have a table filter that just can start to filter whatever there is in the table and some status bar. On the upper part, if we open entities, we have dialogues. They're opened as view tabs. This is also new with the HTML5. Before we just had these modal dialogues usually. And there's some tools and menus that you have over here. So this is the basic layout of a standard Scout business application. I have done a small screencast so I don't mess up with time. And we first look at the perspective switcher. So I click here on data, and let's say I work for marketing and can go here. And instead of persons and companies, I see now campaigns, patterns, social media, stuff like that. On campaigns, I can, for example, find the Scout user group meeting. This is what we did during the conference. And I can drill down, and then I see the Eclipse Scout planner field that we use to say which events are happening at what time there. And this is some different. Then I can press F1, and it gives me the access to all the keyboard shortcuts. So we take great care that with Scout, even in the web, you have very good keyboard support. I can go back on companies, and maybe let's click on person. Then I don't show only results, but I have to give some search criteria because normally there are too many. Anyway, let's go back to company and click on Eclipse Foundation. For example, I have here the actions, and I can drill down, and I'm offered here whatever is related to Eclipse Foundation. For example, persons. Here I have the table. I can press F1 again, and then I see here A to Z. This means I just start to type, and this is going to filter whatever content there is at the table. So I write Mike, I get access to Mike Milinkovic, I can use edit. Here I have some contact details, I can call Mike, pop him down for whatever reason. And I can switch back to here. I don't have to close this dialog. Before we always had to close, now we can have several open and switch them form back. Adding a new person, in that case, I'm scared for marketing, and before I save, I can check for duplicates in our product. I see, oh, it does already exist, so of course I don't want to save, I can cancel that. And that's it. Before we close, let's have a look at the toolbar. So, oh no, we do search first. F3 gives a global search. This is a thing that we can search for whatever entities we have. So it's not really about showing products. I just need something where I have many of the same entities, and so this is a good place. I can go to communications, because then I can show one of the charge table tools below here. And out of the data here, it is kind of auto-generating charts. In that case, I see the responsible, who is responsible for many communications. I go to a horizontal chart, something like that, or to a pie chart like that. The charts are kind of interactive, so if I click on a part of it, it's used here in the table above as a filter, and I can just change the selection and remove the filter for this. And now before we exit, I think I'm going to look at this tool here, which basically is an encapsulated standard Scout dialog. I can do whatever I want in that case. This is the CTI integration with our product. You can see that we have here search as you type possibilities, and then I can call or hang up if I'm not responding, or look at the history if I've had missed calls, stuff like that. And if this is done, let's move to the small demo application here. There's some additional features in the table which I'd like to briefly show. There are simple things just like sorting, of course. I can sort here, but I can also add sorts by, say, now inside of the organization I want to sort for last name, but additionally, so I can have multi-level sorting in the table. I can move stuff around either by drag and drop or by this column control. I have, for numbers, I hope that's going to work, I have the possibility to aggregate over whatever there is here. I can choose not only to aggregate, I can average, minimum, maximum, stuff like that. Let's go back to sum. If I have more columns, then this is going to aggregate over the selection that I've taken here. And one last thing, maybe I can group by clicking here. So I get additional rows that are grouping over whatever I've seen here. So this is basically the standard capability of the Eclipse Scout table that you see here. This is not product specific, but that you can do stuff like that. This is built into Eclipse Scout. So if you have a table in Eclipse Scout, it will be able to do what you just have seen. Let's open a dialog. And now we're going to have a look at styling and theming. We first do some theory. Basically, behind the scene, there is CSS3 and less for styling. The organization is that we first have a bunch of global less files. They are responsible for colors, fonts, and sizes. So there's one central place where you can change some of the common stuff in the application. But there's also the thing that each Scout component has its own, well, JavaScript and CSS file, so they can do component-specific styling as well. So you have a less file for a form, for a field, for a button, stuff like that. Optional, you can have project-specific less files. And these project-specific less files will override the Scout default files. This, you have your own project, and you can do corporate identity and design stuff inside of your project less files. And as I've used the name theme, theme is basically just a bunch of these less files that share a common suffix. And this is how I can then switch between different themes inside of the application. Now I have my bunch of CSS files. What Scout is doing, it's first collecting all the valid less files, and it prefers the project-specific less files over the default files. Then all these less files are processed via the less processor and assembled to a single big CSS file that is sent to the browser for display. I'll show you the theming on this small sample application. What we did see here is basically the default theming of the Eclipse Scout. It might change slightly until the Neon release is final, but it will probably look roughly like that. Now we have the possibility here in this option thing that we can do some different styling. In that case, as we have to be modern and you have to have a dark theme, I added some files to change the theming for a dark theme. So that's how the same application looks with a dark theme. And if you know Eclipse Scout applications from before, they were so whitish, light blue stuff. We called that the Rio theme. And if you don't want to shock your users from before, you can copy paste this and then have something that looks pretty similar to the Rio theme that we had before. Okay, so How's this styling look in the IDE? I go to this demo project. This is mine. And there is some Maven module here for the HTML part. And inside of that, I've in my JavaScript folder, I have Scout style. And for example, this one, the color stark. This is my less file that controls global color stuff. I also have like fonts and sizes. And you see here, this is dash dark. Maybe if you can't read, you have to believe it's dash dark. And this is the selector that will then pick when you choose for dark that which CSS files will actually do the job. Now, if you want to have some global thing changed, we can, for example, say, let's change the background of these controls here. Then I have here a control background color and a control color. I have some snippets so that don't mess up with the colors. I can replace these guys. Change that through actual colors. Save. And if I go back and reload, then I'm running through the whole Scout script processor that does all this magic with CSS and less and assembling and minifying. And then I've changed the background of my fields. This is how the global styling works, but I said there's also individual styling. Let's have an example for individual styling. Going back, I have here a dialog, which is a dialog part. And now if I want to change how this looks, and not only colors, then I have to go to the CSS file that is specific for these dialogs. And this guy is located here on form dark CSS. And we have the dialog class here. And that code is responsible for how the dialog looks like now. So I'm going to change that to slightly different settings that use actual CSS3 stuff, such as transformation and rounded corners and whatever you want. And reload. And then that dialog should come up slightly different than before. This is something that you cannot do with normal styling. It's probably not what you would do in real life, but it shows you that it's actually CSS3, what you have here. I guess that's about it from my side. And now I'd like to hand over to the second part, where we talk about the new Java platform. So we take some time to move this. So, thank you very much, Matthias. It's okay.
Kannst du es an den Pulli machen, weil hier Platz ist. Dann gibt es keine gute Öffnung.
Hier?
Ja.
Voilà. It's okay. So, thank you. So, my name is Daniel. I'm a committer to the Eclipse Scout project, working for the same company as Matthias does, for BSI, and I was involved in I was also part of the team that made Eclipse Scout go away from Eclipse and OSGi to become a pure Java framework. What will I going to talk about the time I have? First, I want you to tell about our motivation we had in becoming a pure Java framework. Then, second, I will give a very short abstract about our platform. And finally, we'll have a look at the platform, at the most important component in the platform. That's a bean manager, which actually replaces OSGi services and the Eclipse extension registry. So, what was the motivation we had? I want you to know that it was not an easy decision we just made overnight or while drinking a beer. It's just a result from the experience of the many problems our projects had. So we had to change something. The whole thing was way too complex. We wanted to cut down complexity, to reduce the technology stack and simplify the tool chain. And also, we only wanted to use pure Maven. So say goodbye to Tycho. Tycho is a very good thing, but it's too complicated for most people. So we just want to be based on Maven.
for Maven to declare dependencies, to run our builds, and also to integrate libraries, third-party libraries directly from Maven Central. Also, it was never easy for us to properly integrate with EE application servers. For instance, I think of providing web services with JuxWS, or accessing EJBs from applications within the same containers. We almost every time ended in the class loading hell, and we wanted to change that. That's the reason why we did that move away from OSGi. Here, this slide gives you an impression of how our platform looks like. You see the platform, which is responsible for the application lifecycle. As you can see down here, the platform implementer can be changed. When the application starts up, a platform implementer is looked for through Java Service Provider, Interface API, the standard Java mechanism to change implementations. So if you have some specific need, feel free to change that. You also see platform listeners. You need that if you're interested in platform lifecycle events to do some specific stuff. That's actually the very same like the Eclipse application, where you have the I application that's called sometimes during the startup, where you can start with interacting with your application. And here on top most you see the bean manager. It's a very central component. It actually replaces OSGi services and the extension registry. The bean manager is based on a class inventory. The class inventory is here to spider class path for all available beans, so that the bean manager can look them up. We did not reinvent the wheel by ourselves. We are using existing proof technology, that's Chandex. It's a whitefly technology which is also used by Hibernate and really does a really good job. So, but let's start from the beginning. What is a bean? A bean is just a simple Java class. A Java class that is annotated with a bean annotation. Let's make a class a bean. With that bean, you can provide some functionality. And the very cool stuff about beans is that they do not require you to implement a technical nor a business interface. So you just have that class annotated with the annotation, and it's a absolutely valid bean. Beans either have application or instance scope. What's the difference? An application scope means that bean is a singleton, that it exists only once in the web application. Whereas instance scope bean, every time you look up a bean, you get a very new instance. That's the difference, stateful, stateless beans. So how does an instance scope bean look like? It's just a simple class annotated with @bean, and this bean provides some functionality to say hello. That's a valid bean. How can you look up that bean? It's also very easy. You use the bean manager, beans.get, and there you provide the name of the bean you're interested in, the class name. You get the bean back and can invoke some functionality on that bean. If you're doing that a second time, you get another bean back, and you see that here in the memory reference, it's two objects. It's not the same because it's instance of, so every lookup results in the instantiation of a new bean. So what's the difference to application scope bean? They almost look the same, with the only difference that the annotation is different. The annotation is @application scoped. The lookup is the very same, with the difference that you got the very same object back. It's a singleton. So let's get some real project. For that I changed to Eclipse IDE, so I can show you a small sample of that. Also here I have an empty workspace. It's nothing in there, just downloaded from Eclipse.org. It's no Scout platform in here, nothing. I'm going to create an application where I provide and access and look up a bean. We're doing that together. For that to work, I create a Maven project. I just create a simple one, skip the archetype selection, give it some default coordinates, and create that module. So in the POM XML file, I have to declare dependency to our platform because we're only using the bean manager. For that, I prepared a snippet. So, because I do not know that by heart, so now we are accessing the platform in snapshot version. You see here the Maven dependency, they were updated, so now I can work with the bean manager. I will provide some beans within that module here. So I have to create an XML file which indicates the bean manager that this module provides beans. That way we can exclude modules to not be looked up, so that boosts performance during the startup. So according to the Java convention, I create a file in the folder meta-inf, and here the marker file Scout XML. So let's start with the new bean. I create a new class. I name it Eclipse bean. I make it the bean by putting the notation on it, and I add some functionality. Say hello, it's the same as we had before on the slide. That makes sys out and says hello Ludwigsburg. There we go. Now I create our application. It's a simple Java main class that I toggle that. So we have an empty main method, and here I'm going to access that bean. I do the lookup, Eclipse class, and say hello. If I now run the application, I expect the application to find the bean and print it out. So you see, it's very less effort necessary to put that functionality into an application. So, but now comes the fancy thing. I'm not only interested in my beans. I also want to look up other beans. For instance, I want to access a list, a Java util list from Java. I want to write that Java util list. So then I get a regular list back, and here I add a person, John. I print out that list, and I'm interested in the actual type of this list I get. So let's run the program anew. What will we get? You see here we get an exception. There's no instance found. Yeah, how could the bean manager find the real implementation of which list I'm interested in? For that to work, I'm able to register beans dynamically. And I also prepared a snippet. For that I need a platform listener. So when the platform is ready, the bean manager is ready, here bean manager prepared, then I can access the bean manager and register some beans manually. And I want to register the array class, and I just rerun the program. So you see, John, that's the string of the list. And I actually get an array list. That's a list I registered here. For me, it's pretty cool stuff, that. So I go back to my presentation, and I want you to tell what makes Scout Bean Manager so great. First, that's a thing we just saw, that any object can be a bean. That's because beans can be provided dynamically, either the way we just saw before, or also by installing a bean producer. I didn't show that because it's slightly another way to choose, but it works the same way. With that mechanism, you are able to integrate with other bean managers. Let's say you're running an e-server and you have another application there which uses Spring Bean Manager. So with a bean producer in place, you're able to access those beans with the Scout Bean Manager. Also, beans can be replaced either by declaration, by putting a notation on a bean that inherits from another bean, or dynamically in the platform listener. A bean is registered on all its concrete supertypes and interfaces. That's just what we saw before. The array list, it's accessible by beans.getArrayList.class or beans.getList.class. That's for free. So now I want to give you some example how bean lookups look like. This example is about Volkswagen. It's a car that implements the iCar interface. And Volkswagen is in this example have 4 models. That's first the Golf. We have a Passat, the Polo, and the e-Golf. You also see here a few annotations. Here on very top we got a bean annotation. That means that every class down here also becomes a valid bean. What we see here is a replace annotation, meaning that the e-Golf actually replaces the Golf. So the Golf does not exist anymore in the bean manager because now there's the e-Golf. We also see here that the Polo has a @ignore bean annotation on it, meaning that this bean will not be discovered by the bean manager. Also, I see that beans are ordered. That is of interest if I look up beans by interface and I have multiple different implementations of that interface. And the highest priority, that's the lowest order. So meaning that the order -2 has a higher priority, is more specific than an order of -1. So here are some examples to show how that's work and that is what we expect. If I query all cars, also all beans that implement iCar, here I will get the e-Golf because it replaces the Golf. I will get the Passat, it's a valid bean, but the Polo I won't get because it's ignored. And now according to the order, I first will get the Passat and afterwards the Golf, the e-Golf, because it replaces the Golf. If I query for a specific iCar, then I get the most specific back, and that will be the Passat. If I query Volkswagen, you see here, it's an abstract class, I will get nothing. That will result in exception. If I query for Golf, I will not get the Golf, but the e-Golf instead. If I query for Passat, I will get the Passat, because the Passat is an absolutely valid bean. If I query the Polo, I will get an exception because the Polo is ignored. But there's some other syntax, beans optional, so give me that bean if it's known to the bean manager or otherwise null. That's for extensibility reason. If you have a core product where we expect, depending on the final product, some components are here or not, you can work with the optional. So how are beans discovered? It's like magic. You never saw me do any registration. There's no plugin XML where I had to register those beans. It's just that they were just found by their presence. And how does that work? That's, as I told at the very beginning of the session, it's the magic is done by Gendex. Gendex builds an index file which is calculated typically during Maven build in the lifecycle phase process phases. That index is used at runtime by the bean manager to create a class inventory to look up all those beans. So the lookup is very fast because at build time that index was calculated. When running out of the IDE, like I did before, in development mode, that index is calculated on the fly on application startup. So I can do easy development, but if I'm running in a container, server container, whatever, it's calculated by Maven. So that's quite all of my part. Matthias.
So, okay, let's move to the summary and come to the take-home message. There are only two things that we would like you to remember. With the Neon release, Eclipse Scout becomes a pure Java framework and has a powerful new Java platform with this nice bean manager we have been presented by Daniel Wiel, and it's basically Maven by the books. So as standard as possible, no fancy stuff. And on the UI side, we have HTML5 UI, JavaScript, CSS3, and it allows for custom themes and custom styling in a very easy way. So you can adapt your application very easily to your, basically to your organization's demands on whatever you use. Thank you very much for listening to this session, and please don't forget and be so kind to give a rating to these talks, what you liked or not. If you want to add comments, that's perfectly valid. Thank you very much.